Let's talk about Umberto Eco's The Infinity of Lists. I would classify this book as a visual essay, but that doesn't really hint at everything that's going on in this book. Yes, it in a way, everything's a visual essay, unless you're listening to it. But this is maybe we should call it a fine arts saturated essay. I don't know. I didn't think much about this besides just a visual essay, and I realize now how thin that is. Anyway, we'll get to that. The point is that this is a beautiful book that came out of Umberto Eco's residency at the Louvre. As he says in his introduction, when the Louvre invited me to organize a series of conferences, exhibitions, public readings, concerts, and films on a subject of my choice, I didn't hesitate and proposed the list, as well as catalogs and enumeration. Hence, the infinity of lists. You'll see that there's nothing on the cover. There's only a faint imprint, Umberto Eco, The Infinity of Lists. This hardcover is produced by Rizzoli of New York. It's beautiful. He has a couple of others that they have produced. As you see here, I have a collection that represents a fraction of his output, just like my previous video about William T. Vollmann. I hope to complete both of those collections someday. Anyway, this one's pretty close, I believe, minus maybe some essay collections and a novel here and there. Let's start with the middle vertical books whose spines are pointing at us. This represents, in my opinion, sort of the lower shelf stock of Umberto Eco. All four of them are novels. They have great concepts, but they just pale in comparison to two juggernauts of his output that we'll get to last. As you'll see, standing up, bold, and monolithic is semiotics and the philosophy of language. Umberto Eco, this is his contribution to the field of literary theory. Semiotics, of course, being the studies of signs. And because he is a medieval scholar, it makes sense that signs would sort of be his topic of interest, as they're just, history from medieval times with the Knights Templar, and so on and so on and so on. I could go on forever about all the different cults and so on, but there is always a sign, there's always some visual representation of lots of underlying meaning. If we look on top of the vertical spine-facing novels, you'll see this really odd book here. I don't even know where I found this. It's called How to Write a Thesis by Umberto Eco, and you'll see this is definitely representative of him. This is a classic picture. This is a little dated now, as far as the sort of more detailed research methods and so on. I think there's even stuff about how to use a card catalog in it and so on, which dates it. However, the concepts of research and choosing a thesis and so on from a scholar at this level shouldn't be missed by any student. I got that while I was in grad school, to just give me another leg up on thesis concentration. Over here to my right, the most recent of which is Chronicles of a Liquid Society, which is a compendium of a bunch of short columns that he used to write in a magazine that I don't feel like looking up in that book. The one underneath, however, is Inventing the Enemy. This is my favorite essay collection, and we will get to that here in a little while. So now the two juggernauts. Most people are at least somewhat acquainted with the name of the Rose, even if it's through the movie with Sean Connery, which accounts for most of the people I've talked to. When I tell them that was actually a book first, they get very interested in reading, and then they start reading it, if they even go and buy it, and they quickly abandon it. But this is a very, very special book, and it is his most popular amongst Umberto Eco fans. He sets this, of course, in the 14th century, and it takes place in a monastery. There are monks, and it's saturated with all of the history of which he is a scholar. There's a labyrinth, there's libraries with secret passages, there are people hunched over in a scriptorium illuminating and copying texts. It's a real treat. However, I would like to talk about my favorite, Foucault's Pendulum. This is my absolute favorite of everything Eco did in his life, and including the now forthcoming posthumously published essay collections chiefly. Chronicles of a Liquid Society is actually posthumous, and there's another one coming out later this year, maybe October. I cannot remember what it's called, but anyway, it's another essay collection. However, this is what Dan Brown in the Da Vinci Code wanted to be and just could not. This came out well before Dan Brown's little book. I think most people unfortunately would abandon this because of the level of scholarship and technical, historical, and cult thought and so on. But this book, it's a great book for anyone who, first of all, people who are looking for an intelligent read, a long read, which I like. People who get lost down the rabbit trail of Wikipedia would really like this book. Umberto Eco just knows so many things about so many different topics. He's definitely, he definitely seems to have all of Western culture at his disposal. And it is on full display in this book, complete with his penchant for mysteries. He's definitely got that Italian penchant for mysteries, of course, harkening back to the Giallo or Yellow novels, which were their little pulp fiction novels that were always wrapped in a yellow jacket. But besides just being so intellectual, he's also a humorist, so there's a fair bit of humor. It's been a while since I've read this, but if I remember correctly, there are 3 scholars who sit around at a publisher and they proofread scholarly texts, and they end up out of boredom concocting these conspiracies. But then, of course, fiction meets reality, and they end up in this paranoid chase all over the place. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. Let's talk about, for just a second, one of the essays in Inventing the Enemy. Let's see, I'll have to reacquaint myself with it. It's been several years since I read it, blah, blah, blah. Oh yeah, Living by Proverbs. This is classic humorist meets intellectual. Here, I gotta acquaint myself with it, but apparently in here, Eco has discovered a book, and if you aren't acquainted with his home library, go on YouTube, or well, I guess you're already on YouTube right now, but search for Umberto Eco Home Library and check this out. It's unreal. But anyway, he discovered a utopian society called the Republic of Happiness. And once it was established, they decided that it would be based on nothing but proverbs. And so Umberto Eco, it just very creatively goes through and talks about what this society would have been like based on all of these proverbs. And it is both extremely creative and extremely hilarious, because he, even though it's a great thought to invent this utopian society, which of course we know how well those work out from history, to create it based on the foundation of proverbs with, that have really good moral intentions, Umberto Eco shows the humorous side of the calamity in which that could lead to. And finally, the infinity of lists. In trying to figure out how to explain this extremely interesting and beautifully produced work, the only way that I can think to describe it is that the experience of reading it is like walking through an art museum, listening to an engaging scholarly lecture, and reading an encyclopedia of great literature. What he has done is he has combed through all the Western literature, all of the Western visual art, and used them to highlight or illuminate all of his different theories on lists. And so you get things like the chaotic list, you get the visual list. As you can see, there's Bosch in here. Mona Lisa makes an appearance. I think she pretty much has to. The ineffable list. And he goes in and he talks about Virgil, Aeneas's journey in the underworld, and then highlights these things with these beautiful reproductions. Some of them, multi-pages long. He goes in chronological order from Achilles' shield that's created by the engineer Hephaestus, and goes all the way into the 60s. He goes Andy Warhol and pop art style, all the way until he gets to a beautiful, beautiful ending. And you will wonder, as you're reading through this treasure trove, how in the world he's going to wrap this thing up. Well, what he does is he goes to a non-normal list, and he uses Borges, a short story from Borges, and he talks about how this list that appears, how the thing that makes it really disquieting is that among the elements it classifies, it also includes those already classified. Now that's a non-normal list, and that would be like here in figure 1, he talks about how if you've got the concept cat, which is represented by uppercase G, as a set that includes all cats, those are lowercase g, then that's a normal set. However, in figure 2, the capital X is like a set that contains all sets. Well, by definition, that means it has to contain itself. So those delineations are broken. What this comes from, that was first, this non-normal list was first discovered by Georg Cantor, who discovered that there were different types of infinity. I think that was about 1890. And then in the 20th century, Bertrand Russell came up with Russell's paradox. And he actually established a mathematical formula that presents this. So the way that this thing ends is with a beautiful picture by Salvador Dali, the Borges list that contains itself, and then a beautiful prayer by Apollinaire, and then we're in the end. The last 2 lines are beautiful for what this is. Let me try to focus. There we go. Pity for us who always battle on the frontiers of the boundless and the future. So that's the beautifully produced and packed Umberto Eco's The Infinity of